Hey, I'm Alan Furstenberg.
And I'm Mark Tucker. Welcome to Two Voice Devs.
Two voice devs. Hello, Mark.
Hi, Alan.
How you doing?
I'm doing fine. Yeah, how
Good.
about you?
I'm doing well. It is a busy start to the year, but it's a good start to the year so far.
A lot of coding?
A lot of coding, a lot of article writing. Recording this and editing it,
Yep.
uh, experimenting with new stuff, documenting old stuff. Lots and lots going on.
Well, it's interesting. I've this last week I've been involved in one of those things that you think might have been a minor refactoring, which turned into, why am I debugging this for another day? type scenarios. So I don't know. So some days coding goes easier, and some days it's more of a challenge.
That's true. And funnily enough, I think that leads in well to what we wanted to talk about tonight. We uncovered this great article, and then kind of a newsletter that covered the article, which added some more to it. So the newsletter is the Pragmatic Engineer, and it covered an article by Adi Osmani, and I apologize if I pronounce names wrong, that kind of looks at how AI assisted coding will change, has changed, is changing software engineering. And I found it fascinating because it, well, for two ways. One is that it both reinforced and kind of dismissed some of the perceptions I had, but also that it was being written by somebody who's been doing this, who's been using AI tools and working with teams that use AI tools. So this isn't here's what I think is going to happen. This is somebody who's seen a bunch of teams doing it.
Well, because if you look on social media or even like on the news, it's like AI is going to take away your jobs, and there's this general panic. Now, we're going to bring the perspective as developers with lots of years of experience
Yes.
on what our experience have been with AI and using that in programming and kind of how we think it compares to what this article had talked about.
But and that's an excellent point, though. This was an article written by developers. We're coming at it as developers who may or may not be afraid of losing our jobs. At some point in the next
Yeah.
decade. So we have our perspectives on this, but I think they're grounded in some reality. So yeah, let's take a look at this. So it's the newsletter article is divided into seven parts, six of which were Addie's original article, and then the seventh was the newsletter's summary of their additional thoughts.
Yep.
And I just want to, I guess, quickly recap what those seven points are, and then I guess we can discuss what jumped out at us.
Okay.
So they divided it into how developers are using AI and how different developers are using AI. What they call the 70% problem, and that's how it gets 70% of the way there, but there's the other 30% left to go. It discusses what works, what it means for developers, talks a little bit about agentic software and how it may change things. Says something really interesting, which I hadn't thought of, which is that software originally started, there used to be this debate about software being an art or a craft, and then
Yep.
it moved into no, software is an engineering discipline, and now maybe it's going back to being an art or a craft again. And then some additional thoughts, which included things like harkening back to stories from the 1960s, which really resonated with me. Not that I'm from the 60s, to be absolutely clear. I haven't been programming that long. So what jumped out at you?
Oh, so what was interesting? One of the things I thought was interesting is as he went through, he documented things as like patterns, and there was a big, phase over longer than a decade, it would seem to me, where there was this idea of design patterns, where you could break software problems down into patterns, and if you gave it a name, then people could refer to it by the same name, and be talking the same language. So that came out. Plus the topic of craftsman. There was this idea of, like my grandfather was a carpenter, did woodworking. I think he mostly did building stuff, but there were some other like kind of finished products that were more decorative, that he did. But this idea of being a craftsman, like taking pride in your work and doing good quality work, and it's not just applied to software development. It's not just how many lines of code can
Yeah.
you put out, but it's taking pride in how the code is structured, and so that it's maintainable and understandable by others, but also handling edge cases and covered by unit tests and things like that. So both of those concepts of patterns and craftsmanship did kind of come out as I was reading it too, and thought it was interesting that it is also, those same concepts are grounded in other things that have come before in the world of software development too.
That makes sense. It's funny you mentioned woodworking and craftsmanship. It seems like the number of I know more than one software developer who does woodworking as a hobby,
Yeah,
and I never thought about the fact that they are in some ways a very similar discipline. Far
yeah,
from identical, but it does take the same requirement for attention to detail and wanting to do things just right and making things that last. It has some very similar groundings in each. That's really interesting.
yeah. But if you think about like woodwork, it's not just a saw, hammer, nail. Those are some basic tools, and there's skills that you need to learn to use those, hand tools or power tools. So there's skill involved that you improve with over time with practice, but there's also planning the project or identifying, the problem that you want to solve, and so there's planning that goes into it and design. There's all the different steps of that we're used to as software design as well. I think reflects fairly well with a discipline such as woodworking.
And this goes into something that was in the article, which is what it resonated with me so much because it framed an issue that I have in a very different light. So if you've watched us before, I've said things in the past like AI is like a junior developer, and that's great. It's now, but the problem is it's replaced junior developers. So now we're not building our next generation of senior developers because you get senior developers from junior developers. The way it phrases it was what he called a knowledge paradox, that senior developers were using AI to accelerate what they already know how to do. So they already have a good idea on what the software needs to do, and they're using the AI to get it done faster.
Yeah.
Junior developers are using the AI to learn what to do because they don't know what to do. And the results come out very, very differently. So senior engineers will use it to do things like rapidly prototype ideas that they understand, or generate a basic implementation and work on that implementation. Or if they've got a problem, explore different ways to solve that problem. Or, if it's a routine task that you've done this 100 times, but you don't remember it. How do you do this?
Yep.
Do the stuff that you already know how to do. So when you look at a solution, you're like, yeah, that looks right. Whereas junior developers will kind of take code and take it unquestioningly. So the code may end up being incorrect, or have performance issues, or have security issues, or if it doesn't quite work, they don't know how to debug it because they don't know what it did in the first place, or they don't really understand what it was that they just handled. And I think that's a dramatic difference, and it's a really important way to kind of fundamentally understand what the problem is, I think.
Yeah, and that it's important to, I think, bring out that the criticism of um, less experienced developers copying and using code as is predates AI.
Right.
You know, so
It's not a new problem.
yeah, that's like, oh, they're just copying code from Stack Overflow, or or from GitHub, or other places. So that's existed before. So that's been that's still a challenge that you don't want to. So now you have to, like, well, is the quality of the code that was posted in Stack Overflow by some developer less chance of having an error than the code that was generated by generative AI and some LLM? I don't know. Was how much of that code was trained on Stack Overflow and GitHub as well? There. I think regardless, you have to take code that's generated or searched for with a certain sense of skepticism, and
I,
be able to pull apart the good parts and criticize or critique the other parts, and try to figure out what's the best you know thing to put into your code base to solve the specific problem that you're trying to solve.
I think the biggest difference in my mind is that with Stack Overflow, there's additional context.
Yes.
So you have the context of all of the other questions and answers surrounding what you're about to cut and paste. You have the context of, was this given to you by somebody who has a high reputation or a low reputation? You have the context of, when was this question asked?
Yeah.
If it was asked a month ago, okay, we're dealing with modern code. If it was asked 10 years ago, well, I don't know, does that library still exist? Does it work?
Yeah.
We have a lot of additional context that AI is giving you an answer,
Yes.
whereas Stack Overflow is giving you a number of answers that you need to research and apply and understand
Yeah.
without just yes, you can cut and paste it in. And this was the criticism of Stack Overflow, is you could cut and paste it in and not know what it's doing, and it didn't work. Whereas if you actually did a little research, sometimes with what was coming with the code, you'd have a better chance of understanding and doing something with it. I think that context is
Yeah.
the big difference.
Yeah. I think so. What's your experience been with using AI as you've coded? Because it's kind of started, the big generative LLM stuff started about 2 years ago, and so it's just little more than 2 years ago maybe, and so that's when I kind of started using it. But like, what's your experience been?
Well, so my experience has been kind of mixed, and the article addresses this in a way too. I tend not, well, I tend not to use AI tools for the most part. I have tested AI tools in my code editor and giving me suggestions, and I rapidly turned that off because it was not helping me at all. I do use it a little bit. So, what I will tend to find myself doing, and this is kind of what the article talks about, is if I run into a problem, I'll open up Gemini and say, how do I do this in JavaScript? Or what's the function in JavaScript to do this? Or, so I will ask little questions, and maybe I will post a chunk of code in, or I will post a chunk of code in an error message in, and say, what does this mean? I guess the best way to put it is that it's not integrated with my development. I am doing
Yeah.
most of my coding myself, and then kind of turning to it instead of turning to a Google search.
Okay.
How do you
Yeah.
use it?
Well, actually, fairly similarly. So I had tried Copilot early on, so that was kind of more of an integration into the development environment. But it did seem like there was still some sort of a learning curve, or I didn't, it was watching things too much. I don't know. It's like I don't want AI right now. I want, I'm doing this other thing. So, and I know it's changed and improved. So it was, partly because maybe I tried it early and just didn't have a great experience the first time I used it, that I haven't really tried it again. But the way that I use it now is that it is not in my editor. It is in a separate window. And if I hit a problem when I'm debugging, I can do a section of code and the error and kind of get some ideas of why maybe it's what's causing the error. If it's something where I'm trying to do something new and I'm trying to just kind of get some ideas of how maybe I'm going to approach the problem, I'll ask a specific question and maybe some follow-up questions. Or if I'm exploring something that I just a library that I haven't used, or some coding approach, even experienced developers hit new things all the time.
Oh yeah.
So you don't ever know a programming language 100%, and you don't know all the libraries that are possible, and that's kind of what makes things fun, is that you hit new problems as you go from day to day. It's not like you're coding the same things over and over again. If you're
You are
coding
constantly right.
yeah, if you're doing that, then there should be tools to help you. And I guess even though it's in a separate window, I do kind of treat it like some of the integrated tools that are inside of my coding editor. I remember a time where you didn't have rename symbols, so you had to do a search and find and replace all over the place, or there weren't these refactoring tools like extract method, or there are definitely improvements that have been baked into the IDs. I'm just looking for the right level, because
Yes.
I definitely use it every week at least, probably not every day, but frequently I do jump on and say, hey, how do I do this in this thing? Or I'm exploring a new topic, and I do have it generate code and like, show me this in TypeScript, show me this in JavaScript, or explain what this part does. Or so there's different things like that how I use it. So it seems like maybe fairly similar.
Fairly similar. So it sounds like both of us are sort of using what the article refers to as a constant conversation pattern, where we'll start up a chat for a particular task,
Yeah,
or when we've got a specific question, and we'll have this, we may have some back and forth with it, but we will rarely keep that chat alive more than a few exchanges.
yeah,
One of the other patterns they talk about, though, is a trust but verify pattern, where you'll use it for code generation, but you look through that code and make sure you understand it.
yeah,
And I guess I do that a little bit as well,
yeah,
especially for brand new stuff. And then they have something they call an AI first draft pattern, and maybe that's closer to actually what we were just talking about, where it gives you a first cut, and then we apply our knowledge to say, well,
yeah,
okay, I also need to do error checking here, and I'll add some comments here to actually remind me what this does, and stuff like that.
yeah,
So those were a couple of patterns that they talk about being commonly used. But I would note that of those, two of them only sort of rely on the code that comes from the AI, and even then, not really.
yeah. So I think if we were like talking about a spectrum of not using AI at all, using AI fully embedded in the editor, and using AI in a separate window as needed, I think we both kind of fall in that middle ground.
Yeah. One of the kind of arguments that I think this article makes is that we're going to see more and more of that shift towards having it integrated and doing anticipatory work as we're getting more agents involved. So as we're seeing more of a collaborator, as we're seeing more of a real co-pilot,
Yeah,
as we're training the systems to deal with our code better and better, maybe we'll start seeing that shift. But I'm not sure. You know, it does mean that we're going to start seeing these agents, as they talk about identifying potential issues as you're coding,
yep,
or running the test suites automatically for you. And we actually saw Google announce something that sounds like it does exactly that. It will take bug reports and automatically generate a possible fix and run it through the test suite and then present it to you and say, what do you think?
Yeah, yeah, I do think that that is the kind of the next level of things, because there are some things that are, like that follows a specific pattern. It's like I've got an issue. I need to, fix this code, and but also that does one require that there is a big enough context for your code, right, to have it
Yes.
understand what your code base is, but it also requires good prompting, whether it's something that's developer generated or something that the tool is doing behind the scenes. Good prompts to get the thing that you want. Um, and yeah, I'm a little bit picky about the code that gets generated. It might get me there. I think the article talks about that it kind of gets you there 70% of the way there
Yeah.
and 30%. That seems about
Well,
right to me.
it seems about right to me too, and that's actually a quote by it's a quote by Peter Yang, who says, "Honest reflections from coding with AI so far as a non-engineer. It can get you 70% of the way there, but that last 30% is frustrating. It keeps
Yep.
taking one step forward and two steps backwards with new bugs, issues, etc. If I knew how the code worked, I could probably fix it myself. But since I don't, I question if I'm actually learning that much." And I think that says a wealth of information there.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I think that's talking specifically about the case of a non-developer using the tool to kind of go from zero to something,
Right.
which is
Well,
good for like getting to prototypes and
I,
kind of idea generation.
I think, though, what it's trying to say is this was a non developer trying to go from 0 to 100.
Yeah.
They were trying to get all the way there.
Yep.
And what Peter, I mean, I don't like putting words in people's mouths, but I seem to do it a lot anyway. Um, what I think Peter was trying to say is we don't get there. You can't get to 100, but you can get to 70%. And is that good enough?
Yeah. Is it? Can you take it the rest of the way, or can you be part of? Can somebody on your team take it the rest of the way there? Right.
Right.
So I definitely do feel, and I had made the comment to a coworker as I was using AI solving different coding problems, that it did feel like I had another team member that was either like pair programming or going off and saying, "Here, do this task, go work on this." It just seemed like I was doing things faster. It wasn't necessarily improving. I don't know. I guess maybe marginally could be improving, but also potentially could be making code worse by the code that it generated. But it just seemed like I could go faster. I could explore, like, well, that wasn't exactly what I want. Do this again, or change this. And so that's
What,
part of the conversation where you can kind of guide and say, well, I didn't want this, but I actually what I meant was this. And you start getting better and better refinement, and then you're like, the code in the window looks like what you wanted to do anyway, and
See,
it just got faster.
I feel like I don't see that so much.
Interesting.
And I think what the article tried to, suggested that they don't see that so much either. That once you get to that 70% point,
Yeah.
you'll then say, "Oh, this is a bug," and you'll say to the AI, "Fix this bug," and it will fix that bug, but it now
Yeah.
breaks something else.
Yeah, I agree with that part. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as a senior developer, as somebody who knows what you're doing, you can see that, oh, it just changed this and this. I now need to merge these two concepts together.
Yeah.
So, maybe that's a skill that you have, and that, you know, maybe people will need to be developing that kind of skill more.
Yeah, there is a certain extent where I may not know the answer, and this could be like at various different parts of the software development process where I just kind of have a gut feel that this is the approach I want to take with it, which is weird because it's just kind of like I know that it's anchored in experience, but it's just kind of like I think I want to go this direction with it.
No, I'm laughing at that only because in looking at the article, and I was just scrolling through the article trying to find something else that I wanted to bring up. I happened to land on a section titled "Trust Your Experience,"
Oh,
and one of it is question generated code that feels wrong.
yep.
So, you say that seems weird, but you're not the only one that feels that way. And
It's kind of like an additional sense when it comes to programming, but it comes from experience.
and again, the way, and we've talked about this before, the way you get that experience is to make mistakes.
Yep.
And how do we make mistakes? We try. Well,
Yep.
that, and that's one of my concerns about this is AI changing things such that we're not going to be able, we're not going to have the junior developers that have made the mistakes and know how to fix the problems. Because I'm dubious about whether AI will be able to significantly close that last 30%.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's still a lot. It's going to have to get significantly better than what it's able to do, because it's not really understanding the code
No.
per se. It's understanding a pattern of tokens that.
Yes. But I have to say, one of the other things in the article that kind of jumped out at me that, that kind of made sense is they point out that programming languages are relatively simple grammars.
Yes.
So the reason why LLMs do so well with them is that they're very consistent patterns, right?
Yeah.
When we learn how to program, we're learning basic loops and variable
Conditionals.
assignments, and the exact syntax varies, but not a lot.
Yeah.
The fundamental patterns are pretty much the same between most programming languages. And that's why it's so easy for LLMs to look like they do a good job with them.
Yeah. No, that's true.
But I think, and this kind of gets to the other argument, and this is actually a place where I feel like the article tripped a little bit, where it quotes Andrei Karpathy saying the hottest new programming language is English. And the article then talks about how, this is a shift in how we're going to work with development tools. And he then says something which kind of made me want to scream. The ability to think clearly and communicate precisely in natural language is becoming as important as traditional coding skills. And I wanted to scream at this because that's called programming.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to say, because natural language is inherently messy, and
Right.
translations from one, like this word doesn't exist in this language, or not with the same,
Right.
connotation or inflection, or all the different things like that. And that is the reason why programming languages were defined, was to give it a common language.
Right.
Yeah.
Be precise. And that's
Yeah.
why when when you talk to programmers sometimes, we will be, I'll be honest here, I will sometimes be frustratingly annoying and precise when it comes to my language.
Yes.
Because English is such an imprecise language. So talking about thinking clearly and communicating precisely in a human language, okay, I'm not disagreeing with that,
Yeah.
but that's what good programmers always did.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with that.
I mean,
That is funny that he's bringing, because there are advantages, like trying to explain the problem, or trying to explain what you're, if you don't know the exact word, or like the syntax for a certain thing, you can describe it. Because I remember this learning a new language, is I got to a point where I had 1,000, 1,500 word vocabulary, and I didn't know everything, but I knew I could say, tell me, what is the word for the thing that is green, that is, and describe around the problem. And then they're like, oh, it's this. So there's sometimes I understand generally what the concept is, but I don't remember what the exact wording is, or something.
Right.
So that's nice that I can kind of describe this and refine it until I get to the point where I'm like, oh, that's that's the coalesce operator. Oh, okay, that's fine. Yeah. So that's I can see where there's advantages with that, but programming.
And I don't know. I mean, he goes on to say the shift towards agentic development will require us to evolve our skills, stronger system design and architectural thinking, better requirement specification and communication. I, this is what programmers do.
Yeah, and that's what we've been. We've been on
Right.
this big journey to do that. Like, how do we describe a problem? It's a story. You create a user story, and you try to use a specific syntax in how you're describing the problem so that it's clear on.
Right, and this kind of goes to something that is touched on in the last section. So it's not by the original author, but it resonates with something that I talk about a lot. He kind of reminds us that back in the 1960s, they came out with this programming language called COBOL.
Oh, COBOL.
Right, COBOL was designed so that you didn't need to get programmers involved. That business people could use it. My example, which I think is better personally, is that around the same time, you had the introduction of something called structured query language,
Yes.
which we now know as SQL or SQL.
Yep.
And again, it was designed so that managers could ask questions of the database without having to go to the programmers and ask them to get information out. The managers could do it themselves.
Yeah.
Right. That's as programmers we look at SQL and go, that's kind of a silly concept. But it was designed to do that.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I totally agree. That over the years it has just been, you realize, okay, that was a nice attempt, but because I had COBOL in school, I went through the business program and management information systems, and that COBOL was the required, even at that time, required programming language, and it was very descriptive and more English-like, but you still had to understand conditionals and loops and
right.
logic, and that's where things break down. Not everybody thinks analytically about
And,
things. Just because you know English doesn't mean you can do COBOL.
right. And I think that kind of gets to what I see as a really crucial point. And I've said this before. The job of a programmer has a very, very small part of programming.
Yes.
It's the rest of it that's the more difficult part. It's what makes a good programmer is by being able to do the rest of it. The programming is the simpler task, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
It's the analyzing a problem and breaking it down into parts and understanding what those smaller parts are and understanding the capabilities of your system
And the consequences if one approach to the other, and yeah.
right. It is being able to plan and understand and break and take a huge problem and make it a bunch of smaller problems that you
Yeah.
can solve.
Yeah.
That's a really, really typical. I mean, that's what makes a good programmer, whatever programming language you use.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's interesting because they did try to assign some numbers, like 20% planning. Developers do 40% coding and tests, 20% code review, which does match pretty closely with what I do, and then 20% with the whole DevOps deployment, rollout, maintenance, monitoring stuff.
What I found interesting about those numbers is that he then also quotes Brooks' Mythical Man Month, which, and again, the history of that is the effort that went into programming the IBM System 360 back in the 60s, where he broke it down as 1/3 planning, 1/6 coding, 1/4 component test and early testing, and then another quarter of what we would now call an integration test. Um, but 1/6 coding.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean that seems a little low to me, but only a little. 40% actually seems high to me.
Yeah, well, I think it's with pairing it with testing, like especially unit tests.
Mm,
It's just a good habit that I've gotten into is writing unit tests and writing code, and it's code's not done until you can test it, and it's also not done until it's been code reviewed, which is another part that they bring out because
yeah.
other people on your team need to understand what you're doing, and that kind of helps with a shared common understanding of where the project's going and things as well. So
And I think that's an important point. And I guess the question in the context of AI is how much can and will AI help us with that? And I'm not sure the article talked too much about that, did it?
yeah, yeah, not really. It really did focus on the coding part of things, but I do know that from time to time I use ChatGPT to help me understand, like I was new to Python this year, so I used ChatGPT to help explore different concepts or got a code sample and it's like, I don't know what this is doing, or this looks weird to me. What is this weird syntax? And so it's like, here, explain this chunk of code to me. And there is a part there could, a part of code review is understanding kind of what the code's doing, and if it's in an area that you're not necessarily familiar with as well, and then they've added some additional code, then maybe you need something to kind of help explain what's going on, and you can do that at your own speed as opposed to pulling in the person and say, explain what you did here. Another quote that I liked was talking about, I definitely think that using AI as a developer can help you code faster,
Hmm.
and which could help you be more productive. It could give you time to explore, to do more tasks. It could give you the time to explore alternatives, approaches to tasks that you're taking. But the quote does point out that that is not the goal of software development, is to code faster. So the quote is, the goal isn't to write more code faster, it is to build better software. Used wisely, AI can help us do that, but it's still up to us to know what better means and how to get it, which I think is very much true.
Yes. And I think to me that ties into something that he says later on, which then ties into something else, where he says that the products that will stand out in the future are those that are crafted, those where it doesn't just do something, it does something really, really well. It does something what we used to call elegantly, where it'll handle the details, where it handles the edge cases, where it doesn't feel off. It just feels like it all works nice and seamlessly.
Yeah.
That will be the software of, what we will identify as good software. And that requires a person to craft it. That AI can't do that crafting.
Yeah, and I
Which,
think the when you talk about craftsmanship as well, it goes to the things that the user can see and the things that the user can't see. So like
right,
going back to like a colonial desk with all of its outwardly designs and details and flourishes or whatever, and then you pull out the drawer and you see the nice accurate dovetailing of the sides of the drawer in there. That's not something that people are going to see. So, but it's quality from end to end, and
right.
I think in coding that has a parallel.
I would even extend that to say, it's in the, you pull out the drawer, and you may not think about this, but you've just pulled out the drawer and done something and closed the drawer, and the drawer doesn't stick,
Yes.
and it never sticks. Whereas if you're using, a poorly made one, the drawer will jam. It'll, you need to wiggle it. You need to do, or every so often you'll pull at it and the knob will fall off. You know, that's not always necessarily obvious. It's not always necessarily visible, but you feel it, and sometimes you feel it in its absence. And I feel like software will is the same way.
Yeah.
You'll know when it just feels off. You can't
Yeah.
say why as a
So well
user.
crafted
Yeah.
is the user interface, whether it's graphical or voice. It's the error messages that you see or you don't see. If how errors are handled. Do you just get the sorry, I can't read the data.
Or
Contact your system
nothing.
administrator or
Or
nothing
or
or
just
yeah.
nothing happens. Or
Yep. And
you know,
so it's that, and then it's the how the code's structured, how the components are put together, how the system is architected. There's quality through at various different layers, and depending on different users how they're seeing it, that you can infuse quality throughout.
right. One of the interesting things, though, that the article doesn't continue to say, and it kind of frustrates me, is that he has this concept. He talks about this will be a renaissance of personal software, but then he talks about craftsmanship in it, and I'm like, well, that's not where I expected this to go.
Yeah,
I expected him to say, okay, so this means I'm now going to use AI to generate a program that does what I need it to do. I'm not going to be distributing it. I don't care if anyone else uses it.
yeah,
I've written this software for me. And if it doesn't handle this edge case, I don't care because I didn't care about that edge case.
yep.
If, if it behaves a little weird in this way, well, okay.
I can
And
live
to
with it,
go
or yeah,
and to go back to the woodworking example, that's the same as, I'm not a skilled woodworker, but I can throw together a brick and board bookshelf.
yep,
And it does okay. Because, I'm not going to be putting my nice heavy book collection on this. And, all of my books are small paperbacks. They're not, tall volumes. But it works for me. And
yep.
that's okay.
Yeah, I do think we are going to see AI being used for more personal software, um, kind of solving similar problems that no code,
Yeah.
solutions were trying to solve before AI.
Well, but I think traditionally no code solutions hadn't been marketed in the same way.
Yeah.
I kind of see this as saying, I'm a spreadsheet person, so it's saying to the people that would use spreadsheets for everything, you don't need to use a spreadsheet for anything. Just kind of describe what you want, and this will build exactly that. So whereas a person would go do no code with a spreadsheet before, now they're just going to build their own app.
Yeah.
And I hadn't thought of that angle before.
Yeah.
I think that's not something that I really see a lot of people talking about. The downside of that is that the only place you can get support for that software is your AI that built it.
Yes.
And you can't go to someone else and say, "Hey, I've got this great tool. It works." We're like, "Well, I've got a different tool. How do we exchange data between them?" I don't know. Let's ask one of our AIs and see if it can do that.
Yeah. So one last quote that I wanted to bring out from this newsletter article was talking about software engineers using AI. And the quote is, as a software engineer, mastering AI assisted development will make you more productive. I agree with that. And also more valuable. So I think that's true. I think that having the skills that make a good software developer with the skill of using AI as needed, where necessary, where appropriate, to help you with software development is going to make you a more valuable software developer over time.
And I don't think that's going to change.
Yep.
I think we kind of opened this up with fears, but I want to, start wrapping it up with and I think these have been the essential skills of a software developer. And those skills become more important, not less important.
Yeah.
So very much agree with that. I think it's a great quote to start going out on. This has been, it's a great article.
Yes.
It's a great set of articles. They'll be in the links, in the comment section below. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to do so. I want to have this conversation more. I think this time next year we're going to talk and see how our jobs have changed. But I also want to hear from people who, are working with this. I want to hear from junior developers and hear what your experiences are. How do you use AI, and do you feel you're actually building good code with it?
Yeah.
I want to hear from senior developers and see, if your experiences match ours.
Yeah.
So find us on social media. Let's have this conversation. Make comments below, and we will keep chugging along with this as two voice devs.
Two voice devs. Take care, Alan.
Take care, Mark.